They sit quietly in corners on shelves by your window, unmoving, unbothered. You water them, maybe dust their leaves from time to time, but you never stop to ask, what are they doing when you're not looking? You see, not all plants are innocent bystanders in your home. Some of them are alive in more ways than one, absorbing tension, neutralizing chaos, and redirecting the very flow of energy around you. In Feng Shui, there are certain plants that act like energetic gatekeepers. They're not here just to beautify a space or freshen the air. They're here to protect, to enhance, to quietly shift your fortune. And yet most people treat them like decorations, placing them randomly, watering them unconsciously, unaware of the subtle influence these living beings can have on their relationships, their money, their sleep, their peace. Here's the truth no one told you. A single potted plant, if chosen and placed with intention, can do more for your personal luck than a room full of crystals. One leaf, pointed the right way, can soften the anger between two people. One root system, anchoring near your front door, can shield your household from misfortune. And one quiet stem in your wealth corner could be the reason money flows more easily this month. So today we're going deeper than Pinterest trends or viral TikToks. On New Day Mindfulness, we're uncovering 4 specific Feng Shui plants that don't just survive in your home, they serve it. These plants work in silence, transforming the invisible fields around you into channels of luck, protection, and long-term abundance. We'll explore the hidden roles they play, the exact areas of your home they should and should never live in, and the ancient wisdom behind why these particular plants have been revered for centuries across cultures, from traditional Chinese households to sacred Buddhist temples. We'll share practical stories of transformation, like the entrepreneur who finally landed her dream client after placing one specific plant behind her office chair, or the family whose constant arguments ceased the week they introduced a peace lily to their living room. This isn't folklore, it's frequency. And once you understand how these energetic guardians work, you'll never see your plants or your home the same way again. Before we begin, if you believe as we do that your living space reflects your inner state and that subtle, mindful adjustments can ripple into major life changes, then I invite you to take a second to click like, share this video with someone who needs a shift in their energy, and subscribe to New Day Mindfulness. Your support brings us closer to our next milestone of 2,000 subscribers, and it helps us continue creating grounded, transformative content rooted in ancient truth in modern life. All right, breathe in, settle your space, and stay with me. Because this isn't just a video about houseplants. It's a guide to decoding the silent guardians already living among you and learning how to let them guard, bless, and elevate every corner of your life. The role of plants in Feng Shui protection. In the practice of Feng Shui, plants are not just aesthetic choices, they are dynamic tools for energy transformation. Unlike static decor, plants are alive. They breathe, grow, respond, and adapt. This quality makes them powerful conduits of qi, the vital life force that flows through and around every space. From the Feng Shui perspective, plants actively participate in the movement of energy. Their shape, scent, structure, and vitality influence whether a space becomes energetically vibrant or stagnant. More than passive greenery, they absorb stress, filter negativity, and, when placed with intention, invite harmony, protection, and prosperity. The core principle here is a distinction between 2 types of qi: sheng qi, which is uplifting and life-enhancing, and sha qi, which is sharp, chaotic, and draining. Certain plants deflect sha qi, while others enhance sheng qi. Their role is to either redirect or amplify the kind of energy you want more of. For instance, upward-growing plants like bamboo or lucky palm trees promote ascension, resilience, and professional momentum. A round-leaf jade plant symbolizes prosperity and financial stability, especially when placed near a front entrance or wealth corner. In contrast, spiky or harsh-looking plants like cactus may generate sha qi, especially indoors, which is why their use must be intentional and placed outside or in boundary-defending locations. Healthy plants radiate life force. They enhance the alive feeling in a room. Their color, movement, and interaction with light energize the home. But a dying or drooping plant does the opposite. It holds stagnant energy, becomes a qi drain, and is seen as a reflection of neglect or imbalance. In Feng Shui, your plants are messengers. A plant that suddenly starts wilting or changing color may be absorbing excess stress from that area of your space, giving you signals to pay attention to both the object and the surrounding energy. The shape and scent of plants also matter. Soft, rounded leaves create gentler, more harmonious vibrations. Plants like peace lilies, money trees, or orchids tend to promote a calm and welcoming atmosphere. Their scent can also shift the vibrational tone of a space. Lavender promotes peace, mint sharpens mental clarity, and basil can energize. From a Feng Shui standpoint, scent is part of the energetic field. It moves through a space like sound or color, subtly influencing mood and qi direction. Placement is another crucial detail. In areas where energy flows too fast, like long hallways or narrow corridors, plants can act as qi buffers, helping slow, redirect, or stabilize the flow. In rooms filled with electronics or mental tension, such as offices or bedrooms, plants can balance excess yang energy or EMF by providing grounding, calming wood energy from the five elements theory. This is especially true for plants like snake plant or areca palm, which are known not just for air purification, but energetic buffering as well. Finally, intention matters. In Feng Shui, it is not just about what plant you place, but why and where. The goal is not simply to add green, but to enhance the functional energy of your space. A plant becomes a co-creator of your environment. It collaborates with your intentions. A peace lily in the bedroom supports emotional healing. A jade plant in your business area encourages wealth retention. A bamboo stalk near your entrance reminds qi and you of upward growth and graceful strength. To sum up, Feng Shui sees plants not as passive decoration, but as active guardians of your home's energy. They participate in energy regulation through their growth direction, vitality, scent, and symbolism. Their placement can either invite support or allow depletion. When chosen wisely and cared for with mindfulness, plants do more than clean the air. They help cleanse, protect, and elevate your life force. Plant number 1, mini Bodhi tree, wisdom rooted in your space. Among all the sacred symbols honored in Eastern philosophy, few are as revered or energetically potent as the Bodhi tree. It's not just a tree, it is a living embodiment of awakening. For thousands of years, the Bodhi tree has represented spiritual illumination, clarity of thought, emotional liberation, and the quiet resilience of wisdom rooted deeply in being. In Buddhist lore, it was beneath the Bodhi tree that Siddhartha Gautama attained enlightenment and became the Buddha, transforming not only his own consciousness, but the spiritual trajectory of an entire civilization. That event was not random, it was cosmically symbolic. The Bodhi tree, by its very nature, radiates grounding, introspection, and the profound clarity that arises only in stillness. So when you introduce a mini Bodhi tree into your home, especially with intention, you're not simply adding a plant. You're creating a vibrational anchor that can stabilize and elevate the energy of an entire room. In Feng Shui, where every item carries energetic significance, the mini Bodhi tree is prized not just for its beauty or botanical heritage, but for its metaphysical role. It serves as what some practitioners call a consciousness cultivator. Unlike plants whose main purpose is to absorb electromagnetic stress or circulate vitality, The Bodhi tree speaks directly to the mind and spirit. It interacts with the energy of thought, quieting mental noise, reducing scattered thinking, and softening inner conflict. In homes that feel chaotic, or in rooms where decision-making, studying, meditation, or deep emotional work takes place, this tree provides a subtle but reliable current of emotional neutrality and sacred presence. Its presence shifts the energetic signature of the room from reactive to reflective. Over time, people often report feeling more focused, calm, and emotionally regulated when sitting near or working around it. The ideal placement for a mini Bodhi tree is in the northeast sector of the home or a specific room. According to the Bagua map in classical Feng Shui, the northeast governs self-cultivation, inner wisdom, and intellectual clarity. It is the area most aligned with knowledge, not the kind of information that can be memorized, but the kind of knowledge that matures into insight. This sector is deeply connected to personal development, life purpose, and mental renewal. When you place a Bodhi tree in this zone, you are amplifying its inherent purpose. It becomes a magnifier for inner work. People who journal, meditate, pray, read scripture, or practice mindfulness will find that the tree serves as a living companion, one that does not speak but listens deeply, absorbing emotional static and reflecting back only stillness. In practical terms, the mini Bodhi tree, well-suited for meditation corners, spiritual altars, therapy rooms, or even home offices where creative flow is essential. Its energy doesn't overwhelm, it does not shout, it doesn't stimulate in the way more fiery plants do. Instead, it grounds, it centers, and it harmonizes. For individuals who struggle with mental fog, anxiety, lack of focus, or emotional reactivity, the tree operates like a silent partner in their healing journey. It doesn't fix problems, but it helps create the conditions under which clarity can emerge. Think of it like this. The Bodhi tree doesn't offer answers. It creates silence deep enough for the right questions to surface. The transformation effect of the Bodhi tree becomes even more important during periods of inner or outer change. Whether you are going through a career shift, a breakup, a health challenge, or a spiritual reawakening, having a mini Bodhi tree in your space is like having a wise elder present, someone who does not interrupt or explain, but simply stands beside you, offering shade and strength while you remember your own center. This is what makes the Bodhi tree such a powerful spiritual anchor. It connects you not only to the energy of the present moment, but to a lineage of seekers, mystics, monks, and meditators who have sat beneath its canopy throughout history. Interestingly, the Bodhi tree's protective energy is not limited to intellectual or spiritual work. In many Buddhist monasteries and sacred sites across Asia, you'll often find full-grown Bodhi trees placed near gateways or entrances. These are not simply ornamental. In traditional belief, they serve as energetic portals, filtering out negative forces before they enter sacred ground. Their roots are said to purify tension from the earth, while their branches absorb disharmony from the wind. When used in the home, even in miniature form, this symbolism carries over. Placing a mini Bodhi tree near the entrance of your space, especially when paired with incense or a mantra, can turn the threshold into a kind of energetic filter where tension and worldly distractions are softened before they enter the core of your living space. Beyond placement and symbolism, there's also the vibrational intelligence of the Bodhi tree itself. Its heart-shaped leaves move easily with the wind, creating a delicate rustling sound that some practitioners interpret as a natural mantra, a gentle reminder to stay awake, to stay aware. The physical act of tending to a Bodhi tree, watering it, wiping its leaves, or sitting quietly beside it becomes a spiritual practice in and of itself. You are not merely maintaining a plant, you are nourishing a frequency, one that responds not just to soil and sunlight, but to presence and respect. And the more you engage with it, the more it begins to shape the energy of your thoughts, your posture, even the quality of your breath. From a psychological perspective, the mini Bodhi tree can also act as an external cue that promotes mindfulness. In behavioral science, environmental anchors, objects within a space that trigger a shift in mental state, are known to enhance habit formation and emotional resilience. Having a mini Bodhi tree in view while you meditate, read, or simply pause for a mindful breath helps associate that space with serenity. Over time, even the act of seeing the tree can shift you from fight or flight into rest and digest, helping reinforce healthy nervous system regulation without the need for external stimulation. Even in the most modern homes, the mini Bodhi tree bridges the gap between sacred and secular. Whether you follow Buddhist teachings, explore other contemplative traditions, or simply wish to invite more calm and clarity into your day, this plant integrates seamlessly. It does not demand belief, it invites attention, and it repays that attention by offering a field of energetic neutrality, a kind of vibrational blank canvas where your higher intentions can unfold without resistance. Unlike other lucky plants that are tied primarily to money, love, or status, the Bodhi tree is not transactional. It's not here to give you what you want. It's here to remind you of who you are. And that makes it one of the most profound plants you can welcome into your space. When you combine intentional placement, respectful care, and aligned personal practice, the mini Bodhi tree becomes more than a symbolic object. It becomes a living metaphor for your journey, rooted, grounded, quietly evolving, reaching upward while remaining still. It reflects the paradox at the heart of spiritual life, that in stillness there is movement, in silence there is sound, and in one small tree there is a map to becoming more fully yourself. Plant number 2, fragrant dracaena, the scent of good fortune. The fragrant dracaena, also known in Vietnamese as Phat Tai Tum, is one of those rare plants that blend beauty, subtle mystery, and spiritual timing into a single living form. While many people know the dracaena family for its hardy stalks and sword-shaped leaves, this particular variety stands out not because of its shape or color, but because of something far more ethereal, its scent. Unlike most indoor plants which offer visual charm or air-purifying benefits, the fragrant dracaena has a reputation rooted in its rare and unpredictable blooming cycle. When this plant blooms, it releases a gentle, sweet aroma, not overpowering, not flashy, but quietly enchanting. And in the world of Feng Shui, that scent carries significance, deep significance. It is said that when a fragrant dracaena flowers, often without warning, it heralds a shift in fortune, signaling that luck is turning in your favor, that invisible obstacles are lifting, and that new doors are preparing to open. In this way, the plant becomes both symbol and messenger, not just a passive green companion, but an oracle of energetic movement in your life. What makes this more than folklore is how consistently the pattern appears. Across Southeast Asia, countless stories circulate about the fragrant dracaena blooming around significant moments. Career changes, unexpected promotions, marriage proposals, or sudden windfalls. Unlike fast-growing plants that bloom frequently, this variety can go years without flowering. So when it does, and the air fills with that unmistakable sweetness, the message is clear. Something meaningful is aligning. The plant, as if connected to a deeper energetic intelligence, responds to unseen shifts long before the human mind can logically detect them. In Feng Shui, this isn't viewed as superstition, it's seen as resonance. The plant resonates with the change already beginning in your life and marks the arrival of new potential with its scent. Its placement, like all things in Feng Shui, plays a crucial role in how effectively it supports the home's energetic flow. The ideal location for the fragrant dracaena is in the east or southeast sector of your home or office. These areas correspond to family harmony and wealth, respectively, on the Bagua map. Placing the plant in the east nurtures emotional relationships, deepens bonds between family members, and promotes generational support. In the southeast, its influence amplifies abundance, long-term financial security, and career momentum. Because this plant is slow-growing and sturdy, it holds energy steadily, anchoring intentions rather than dispersing them quickly. This makes it perfect for those seeking consistent progress rather than short bursts of opportunity. Care for this plant requires intentional gentleness. It thrives in medium sunlight, preferably filtered, and does not respond well to overwatering. In fact, one of the quickest ways to drain its energy is through excessive care, which in Feng Shui terms reflects a pushy or controlling energy that suffocates natural flow. The fragrant dracaena flourishes when it is respected, observed, and lightly nurtured. Its best caretakers are those who understand patience, who know how to wait, how to listen to silence, and how to let something unfold in its own time. That temperament mirrors the wisdom this plant carries. It is not here to respond to force or demand. It's here to respond to rhythm. And in the rhythm of your home, its slow and steady growth brings a kind of reassurance that even when things appear still, progress is happening underground. The energetic story of this plant is perhaps best captured in a modern anecdote that circulated through Feng Shui communities and corporate circles alike. In 2017, during the volatile weeks leading up to Alibaba's record-breaking IPO expansion, Chinese billionaire Jack Ma received an unusual gift. A respected Feng Shui master brought in for energetic consultation presented him with a blooming, fragrant dracaena. It was in full flower, a rare and auspicious event. The master reportedly told him, "This is not a gift, it's a mirror. What is arriving is already in motion." Within the month, Alibaba's stock surged. Skeptics called it timing. Believers called it alignment. Either way, that same dracaena still sits in Jack Ma's private office in Hangzhou today. Regarded quietly as a guardian of optimism and foresight, he is said to water it himself, a ritual of humility and connection in a world that often moves too fast for symbolism. What makes the fragrant dracaena so fascinating is its ability to symbolize the unseen. In energy terms, it's a yin plant, soft, inward, subtle, but it delivers a yang result. Outward fortune, external opportunity, material growth. That balance is rare. Most plants either enhance vitality or ground emotion. Few manage to translate inner stillness into outward gain, but this plant does. That's why it's often chosen for executive offices, family-owned businesses, and spiritual retreats. It brings a reminder that wealth is not just about effort, it is also about alignment, timing, and inner harmony. On a subconscious level, having a fragrant dracaena in your home tells your nervous system that you are in partnership with nature, not in opposition to it. You don't have to force every breakthrough. Some of them arrive quietly, unannounced, through windows you didn't even realize were open. That is the philosophy embedded in this plant. When it flowers, it's not because you made it happen, it's because you made room for it to happen. That's a very different kind of success. From a design perspective, the fragrant dracaena is also deeply versatile. It works beautifully in minimalist, Zen-inspired interiors, as well as in more vibrant, eclectic spaces. Its upright growth pattern lends a feeling of stability and architectural elegance, while its gentle scent creates an olfactory anchor that lingers just enough to be noticed, but never becomes overwhelming. It's this balance between presence and subtlety that makes it such a harmonizing force. In spaces where energy feels anxious or erratic, the plant creates a tone of trust, an invitation to breathe more slowly and act more deliberately. This energetic refinement is something that can't be measured in inches or leaves. It's felt in the nervous system, in decision-making, in the overall mood of the space. Its symbolism also lends itself to ritual use. In some households, when the fragrant dracena blooms, the family gathers for a quiet moment of thanks. They don't celebrate the plant, they honor the timing. In other spaces, it's used in money-calling ceremonies, often paired with incense, cinnamon water, or citrine crystals to strengthen its wealth-attracting frequency. In Buddhist temples, it is occasionally placed near donation bowls or spiritual libraries, reinforcing the belief that knowledge and generosity flow best in sacred timing. One powerful practice is to write a financial or career affirmation on a piece of rice paper and place it in the pot's soil. This isn't about magical thinking, it's about symbolic partnership. You are declaring your intention and allowing the plant to hold that vibration, to protect and nurture it until the conditions are right for it to bloom, both energetically and metaphorically. And when the bloom comes, you'll know it's not just about fragrance, it's about confirmation. To conclude, the fragrant dracena is not just another houseplant. It is an energy-sensitive ally, a symbolic mirror of movement, and a messenger of good fortune that arrives without needing to announce itself. It represents the truth that the universe doesn't always shout, it often whispers. And the bloom of this plant, rare as it is one of those whispers. If you're fortunate enough to witness it, honor the moment, reflect on what's shifting in your life, and remember that in Feng Shui, prosperity is not just about accumulation. It is about alignment with cycles, signals, and sacred timing. When we stop forcing and start aligning, we begin to experience abundance, not as a goal, but as a rhythm we're finally dancing in step with. Plant number 3, Ginkgo biloba. Timeless longevity and energy. Purification. The Ginkgo biloba tree, with its distinctive fan-shaped leaves and golden fall brilliance, is one of the oldest living species on Earth, an evolutionary survivor that has withstood ice ages, nuclear blasts, and centuries of human transformation. Often called a living fossil, the ginkgo is not just a botanical marvel, but a symbol of longevity, resilience, and silent strength. In Feng Shui, this tree is more than decorative. It represents the ultimate essence of endurance. It is the wisdom keeper of the plant kingdom, holding energy that is slow to act but lasting in effect. And its energetic presence in a space provides something that few other plants can offer: the vibration of permanence. While many Feng Shui plants are selected for their vibrant growth or rapid energetic shifts, ginkgo speaks to a different rhythm altogether. Its power lies not in sudden transformation, but in consistency. It anchors the long game. It brings in energy that supports legacy thinking, clear-headed decision-making, and the quiet authority of a life well built over time. For this reason, it is a particularly meaningful plant for those building a future not only for themselves, but for generations to come. Parents, visionaries, mentors, teachers, and leaders who want their work to outlast them. Unlike faster, more delicate plants, ginkgo carries a deeply grounding yang energy. It clears energetic fog not with speed, but with gravity. In Feng Shui, Ginkgo biloba is most effective when placed in the west or northwest sectors of a home or office. The west governs creativity, mental energy, and the fruits of one's labor, ideal for artists, writers, and professionals who are refining their legacy. The northwest sector, often called the helpful people and benefactors zone, also resonates with mentorship, wisdom, and spiritual or ancestral support. A ginkgo plant in this area not only strengthens your connection to the past, but fortifies the future by purifying energetic residue that may be clouding your long-term vision. Unlike other air-purifying plants that operate more in the physical realm, ginkgo operates on a subtle energetic level. It helps purge stagnation, the kind of heaviness that lingers when ideas are half-formed, intentions are fuzzy, or your mental energy is scattered across too many tasks. Its placement in study rooms, home libraries, or creative offices is not only practical, but symbolically aligned with its natural function to clarify, to consolidate, and to stabilize long-term focus. The vibrational impact of the ginkgo is not one of high movement or emotional amplification, but of quiet recalibration. This is especially relevant in modern spaces where overstimulation, digital clutter, and rapid decision cycles can overwhelm clarity. When a ginkgo is placed with intention in such environments, its energetic field acts like a filter, similar to how its leaves in herbal medicine are used to improve memory and brain circulation. The plant itself functions as a spatial aid in clearing mental smog. This makes it particularly supportive for people who work in fields that require deep thinking, strategic planning, or long-term responsibility. CEOs, scholars, financial planners, authors, architects, anyone whose success relies not on quick bursts of action, but on sustained vision, benefits from the presence of this tree. And because it evolves slowly, the ginkgo mirrors and supports the kind of progress that is stable, deliberate, and enduring. One of the most poetic aspects of the ginkgo's energy is its dual role in both holding memory and releasing the past. The tree's unique leaf structure, bilobed and fan-like, symbolizes balance between retention and letting go. In energy terms, this manifests as the ability to carry wisdom without becoming emotionally burdened. It helps a space stay connected to its roots while remaining open to future transformation. That balance is especially vital in spaces where generations overlap. A family estate being passed down, a multi-generational business, or even a therapy office where ancestral trauma is being processed. The ginkgo in such places becomes a vibrational bridge. It doesn't take sides, it simply holds space for both past and future to coexist without conflict. In this way, it becomes an energetic stabilizer in places of emotional or historical complexity. Culturally, the ginkgo is often planted in places meant to stand the test of time: temples, universities, national parks, not because of superstition, but because of what it models through its sheer presence: adaptability, resilience, and calm observation. It asks nothing of its environment but quietly contributes to it. In Feng Shui, the same principle applies. A ginkgo doesn't need constant attention or high maintenance, but it does respond to respect. Its care requires moderation, consistency, and a sense of timing. It appreciates being rooted in well-draining soil, prefers indirect light, and benefits from occasional pruning, not just for aesthetic reasons, but to allow energy to move more freely through its shape. In this way, the act of caring for a ginkgo becomes a practice of refinement, mirroring how we refine our thoughts, our language, our decisions. This makes it especially potent in leadership environments where clarity and discernment are paramount. Psychologically, the ginkgo can be viewed as a living archetype of the wise elder. Just as we might seek counsel from someone who has lived through multiple cycles of change, having a ginkgo in your space invokes that same quality of perspective. Its energy encourages you to slow down, to observe before acting, and to think in terms of decades rather than days. In a culture addicted to immediacy, that energy is not only rare but deeply healing. It reminds us that sustainability, whether in business, relationships, or personal growth, is not built through constant acceleration, but through rhythm, reflection, and rootedness. This is why many traditional Chinese scholars kept ginkgo leaves pressed inside their journals, a botanical symbol of thoughtfulness and long-form legacy. A story often shared in Eastern Feng Shui communities involves an elderly Japanese master craftsman who spent over 60 years perfecting the art of lacquerware. In the corner of his workshop sat a single ginkgo tree in a large ceramic pot, its trunk twisted and refined over the decades by his quiet care. When asked why he had never replaced it with something more ornamental, he reportedly answered, "This one remembers my failures and my breakthroughs. It holds the rhythm of my progress." Why would I trade that for something fashionable? That sentiment perfectly encapsulates the ginkgo's essence. It is not for show, it is for substance. It witnesses, it filters, and it preserves. In the modern context, one practical ritual involves writing down your core values or long-term goals, ideally in your own handwriting, and placing them in a small envelope beneath the ginkgo pot. This is not about magical thinking, but energetic anchoring. The act of grounding those intentions in the soil that supports such a durable plant is a way of declaring that your dreams are not fleeting. They are being built to last. As the plant grows, those goals are symbolically nurtured, even in times when external progress seems slow. This ritual is especially supportive for those entering new life chapters: retirement, entrepreneurship, parenting, or spiritual leadership. It becomes a quiet pact between your future self and your present environment. From an interior design perspective, ginkgo plants and bonsai adapt well to both traditional and contemporary spaces. Their architectural form and textured leaves lend themselves to minimalist aesthetics while offering symbolic depth that enriches the emotional quality of a room. When placed near stone or metal elements, ginkgo enhances the metal energy associated with the west and northwest sectors, further activating the qualities of mentorship, discipline, and visionary thinking. This is particularly effective in spaces where strategic planning takes place: conference rooms, executive desks, creative studios, or even meditation spaces dedicated to life review or legacy work. Ultimately, the ginkgo biloba is more than a plant. It is an energetic ally for those committed to clarity, endurance, and the quiet power of legacy. Its presence in your space does not produce instant results. Instead, it gradually purifies the subtle layers of thought, emotion, and memory that influence your decisions and your direction. It filters what is no longer useful while holding what is essential. And in doing so, it creates an environment where wisdom is not only accessible, but sustained. To live with a ginkgo is to live in conversation with time itself. And in that conversation, you are constantly reminded that real progress is not loud, not quick, and not showy. It is grounded, deliberate, and unshakably alive. Plant number 4, corn plant, enlightening fragrance, a trunk of prosperity. Among the many plants used in Feng Shui to invite prosperity and balance into a space, few are as quietly commanding and energetically substantial as the corn plant, known scientifically as decor fragrance. Recognized by its broad green leaves and thick woody stalk, the corn plant is often mistaken for a basic decorative office plant, but in truth, it holds profound symbolic and energetic significance. In both traditional and modern Feng Shui applications, this plant is often referred to as the wealth trunk because of its structural message. It doesn't simply bring beauty to a room, it introduces the energy of long-term financial grounding. Its central strength lies in its thick, upright trunk, which in energy work is associated with dependability, accumulation, and steady support. Where bamboo symbolizes resilience and adaptability, and jade plants evoke growth through expansion, the corn plant offers something deeper: the unwavering strength to hold wealth, to contain power, and to stand through all seasons. It is not a fast grower nor a fussy presence. Instead, it reflects a kind of quiet financial confidence, energy that says, "What I earn, I keep, and what I build, I protect." The shape and posture of the corn plant make it one of the most ideal symbols for financial foundation in Feng Shui. In the 5 elements theory, it represents the wood element, which governs growth, vitality, and generational expansion. But unlike slender, delicate wood plants, the corn plant sends a stronger visual cue. Its vertical trunk suggests upward movement that is slow but stable, drawing attention to sustained effort, rooted energy, and long-term wealth building rather than fleeting opportunity. In that way, it appeals especially to people focused on financial planning, legacy building, or stabilizing their income stream. Entrepreneurs, investors, small business owners, and homeowners looking to solidify their resources often find this plant's presence not just inspiring, but reassuring. Where some plants invite energy to come and go, the corn plant acts as a container, holding qi, grounding movement, and minimizing energetic leakage. From a Feng Shui perspective, placement is key. The corn plant functions best when located in sectors of the Bagua map associated with financial flow, recognition, and relational support. One optimal location is the southwest sector, which governs relationships and partnerships. By placing the plant here, you strengthen the foundation upon which both personal and business partnerships are built, creating financial alignment between people, whether in a romantic relationship or a joint venture. This also symbolizes your intention to ground shared wealth, to create mutual stability. Another powerful position is in the south sector, which governs reputation, fame, and recognition. A corn plant placed here reinforces your efforts to be seen, respected, and valued for your contributions, particularly in career or public work. Its upright growth symbolizes your rising visibility, while the strength of its trunk supports your capacity to carry that recognition with humility and grace. For many Feng Shui practitioners and energy-conscious homeowners, one of the most strategic placements for the corn plant is near the entryway or main financial altar of the home. When placed near a wealth bowl, cash box, or symbolic prosperity corner, often in the far left area from the home's main entrance, the corn plant acts like an energetic lockbox. It doesn't attract random money luck. Rather, it helps stabilize and contain what's already flowing in, preventing energetic and emotional drains. In this way, it becomes a symbol not of sudden abundance, but of lasting abundance. This distinction matters. In Feng Shui, not all wealth is created equal. Some money comes fast and disappears faster. But wealth that accumulates, that builds, that becomes a foundation for the next generation, that kind of wealth is represented by structures like the corn plant. It is a reminder that prosperity isn't only about growth, it is about holding and protecting that growth. Culturally, this plant has long been associated with upward mobility and internal strength. In many Southeast Asian countries, it is a popular plant for gifting during new ventures, home blessings, or marriage ceremonies because it is believed to embody dependable fortune. Its presence at thresholds or major communal areas within a home signals an invitation to prosperity that is earned through consistency, supported by trust, and protected with intention. Unlike more delicate plants, the corn plant can thrive in office environments with filtered light and requires only moderate care. Yet it grows steadily, with each ring on its trunk recording time and effort like the financial ledger of a well-managed life. One popular ritual to activate its wealth energy involves tying a red silk ribbon around the base of the trunk. In Chinese metaphysics, red symbolizes fire energy, associated with activation, vitality, and auspicious breakthroughs. When you wrap red ribbon around the sturdy wood of the corn plant, you are energetically inviting the element of fire to energize and awaken the rooted energy of wood. This firewood pairing is considered extremely effective in wealth enhancement, especially when you're attempting to generate momentum without sacrificing balance. The act of tying the ribbon becomes symbolic, a declaration of intention to energize your financial journey while keeping it ethically grounded. This small action transforms the plant from a passive presence into an activated guardian, quiet, but now programmed with direction. The psychological effect of the corn plant's presence should not be underestimated. Its form alone, a tall, upright stalk that doesn't sprawl or sag, subconsciously signals discipline, maturity, and responsibility. In spaces where finances are discussed or decisions are made, this visual cue serves to reframe money as something sacred and structural, not fleeting or chaotic. People who keep a corn plant near their workspace often report increased focus, clearer boundaries around spending, and more grounded thinking in high-stakes moments. It becomes a kind of totem for clear-headedness, financial courage, and sober strength. The energy of the plant also radiates dependability. Unlike plants that grow in fits and bursts or react dramatically to changes in light or watering, the corn plant grows slowly and consistently. This calm, unwavering presence stabilizes the nervous system, particularly in areas of the home or office where stress around money tends to spike. A compelling modern example of this plant's energetic reliability comes from a well-known tech startup founder in Singapore who placed a corn plant next to the whiteboard in his company's product planning room. In interviews, he described the plant as the silent investor, always present, always steady, never emotional, never reactive. Over 5 years of product pivots, team changes, and investment rounds, the corn plant remained in the same spot, gradually growing taller as the company scaled. During moments of crisis, team members would pause and touch its trunk as a reminder of endurance and staying power. While not everyone on the team believed in Feng Shui, nearly all acknowledged that the plant carried a stabilizing energy that they came to rely on. The corn plant's symbolism also dovetails beautifully with the concept of Earth Qi, the grounding, centering energy that connects individuals to space, purpose, and material stability. In homes where energy tends to rise too quickly, creating emotional reactivity, anxiety, or scattered focus, the corn plant introduces a deep anchoring effect. It helps tether aspirations to action, dreams to structure, and vision to execution. It is a visual and energetic reminder that growth means little without roots, and momentum without structure eventually collapses. To deepen the plant's impact, you might consider pairing it with complementary elements. Placing a piece of pyrite or green aventurine stone at the base of the pot strengthens its money-holding capacity, while a small wind chime above can help keep the energy around it active and circulating. For those with a spiritual practice, it's also beneficial to recite a well-focused affirmation while watering the plant. Something simple and grounded, like, "I create lasting prosperity through consistency and care," helps link your energy to the plant's purpose. Over time, this act becomes a grounding ritual in itself, a way of weaving wealth intentions into your daily rhythm. In closing, the corn plant is not merely a fixture of corporate lobbies or waiting rooms. In the language of Feng Shui, it is a symbol of personal and professional maturity. It reflects a commitment to the long haul, an appreciation for stability, and a deep understanding that true abundance is not just about how much you can call in, it's about how wisely you can hold, grow, and protect what you already have. This plant belongs in the spaces where plans are made, where values are lived, and where wealth is not chased, but cultivated. By inviting it into your space, you are not just hoping for prosperity, you are preparing to hold it with strength, patience, and enduring grace. Energetic enhancements, simple additions to amplify impact. While plants in Feng Shui are powerful, energetic allies on their own, their full potential is often unlocked when paired with specific energetic enhancements. These additions do not replace the inherent value of the plants, but instead amplify and refine their natural abilities to absorb, radiate, and redirect Qi. Much like tuning a musical instrument, these enhancements help harmonize the living field of the plant with the energetic needs of the space. Each enhancement, whether it be sound, scent, crystal, or movement, serves a distinct purpose, acting like a frequency modifier that brings your plant's subtle energy into sharper alignment with your intentions. The first and perhaps most immediate method for activating plant energy is through movement, and one of the most elegant ways to do this is by introducing wind chimes. In Feng Shui, wind chimes are not mere decorations. They are key activators. The sound they produce, especially when crafted from metal, wood, or bamboo, is considered a call to fresh energy. When placed near leafy plants, particularly in stagnation-prone corners or sectors where energy feels heavy, wind chimes do more than create ambiance. They disrupt stale qi, inviting lightness and flow. The tinkling tones serve as a sonic invitation to opportunities. From a vibrational perspective, the wind chime breaks energetic inertia, reminding the space in your subconscious that nothing is fixed and that change is not only possible but welcome. The movement of air around the plant also supports photosynthesis and prevents energetic dullness. While many people focus only on the visual or symbolic aspect of a plant, Feng Shui understands that qi responds to vibration, and vibration is most directly influenced by sound and movement. Therefore, placing a wind chime, particularly one with 6 or 9 rods, which are considered numerically auspicious, beside a plant in your wealth corner or career area can catalyze growth that is both subtle and surprisingly swift. The second enhancement comes from the world of scent. Essential oils have long been used for their therapeutic properties, but in Feng Shui, they are understood to be energy movers. Citrus oils like orange, lemon, and grapefruit are especially powerful when used near plant areas because they stimulate not just mood but qi circulation. Their high-frequency vibration mirrors that of expanding light, making them ideal for energizing wealth zones or areas where motivation has dulled. Simply diffusing citrus oil near a jade plant or money tree recharges both the space and the plant itself. Basil oil, known for its focus-enhancing properties, can be particularly effective when diffused near plants placed in study rooms or home offices. While frankincense, associated with spiritual clarity and purification, amplifies the grounding sacred function of Bodhi trees, peace lilies, or Dracaena varieties placed in meditation zones. It's important to note that oils should never be poured directly on the plant or its soil. Rather, they should be introduced through air diffusion or placed on nearby stones or fabric. This method ensures that the energy of the plant remains uncluttered, while the surrounding field is gently elevated. Over time, this pairing of plant and scent creates a conditioned energetic memory. Just as Pavlovian responses occur in behavioral science, your nervous system begins to associate the scent with the energy of growth, intention, and expansion. This strengthens your relationship with the plant, not only as a living object, but as a living ally. The third and often underestimated enhancement is the use of crystals. Crystals are not just geological ornaments. They are ancient records of vibrational patterns. When paired with plants, they offer grounding, focus, and directional power. For wealth attraction, citrine is especially effective. Known as the merchant's stone, citrine resonates with solar energy, personal power, and abundance. Placing a small piece of citrine in the soil of a money tree or jade plant doesn't just beautify the arrangement. It directs the plant's qi toward attracting and retaining prosperity. The citrine acts like a conductor, focusing the plant's natural energy field toward financial and creative output. Black tourmaline, on the other hand, is a protective stone. Known for absorbing electromagnetic frequencies and psychic tension, black tourmaline is ideal for use with snake plants or corn plants placed near technology, such as Wi-Fi routers, TVs, or computer stations. The stone reinforces the plant's protective function, making it doubly effective at filtering harmful frequencies. For emotional warmth and relationship healing, rose quartz is the crystal of choice. Soft pink in hue and frequency, it is best paired with peace lilies, orchids, or any plant placed in the southwest sector, the area associated with love and connection. The rose quartz gently amplifies the plant's ability to soften emotional tension, encourage vulnerability, and stabilize romantic or familial energy. It's essential, however, to place crystals with care and purpose. They should be cleansed regularly, either through moonlight, salt, or sound, and ideally introduced to the plant with a spoken affirmation or prayer. This bonds the object to the intention, creating coherence between the mineral and botanical energies. The fourth energetic enhancement, and perhaps the most vibrationally refined, is sound. Unlike wind chimes, which respond to environmental conditions, intentional sound introduces a conscious frequency shift. One of the most powerful tools in this category is the Tibetan singing bowl. Used for centuries in monastic settings, the tones produced by these bowls are not merely soothing, they are frequency resetting. When played near plants once a week, the bowl's tone vibrates the water molecules in the soil, the air molecules around the leaves, and even the cellular structure of the plant itself. This subtle stimulation supports vitality and coherence in the plant's energy field. It also refreshes the chi of the entire space. When used consistently, singing bowls can revitalize sluggish areas of the home and keep your plants energetically attuned to your evolving intentions. For added depth, chanting mantras such as Om Mani Padme Hum or Gate Gate Paragate Parasam Gate Bodhisvaha, while tending to your plants, introduces spiritual alignment. Plants respond not just to the tone of your voice, but to the sincerity of your presence. Speaking to them while holding an affirmation or prayer creates a living circuit of intention where the plant, space, and your consciousness harmonize. Over time, these rituals deepen the subtle intelligence of your environment. Your plants no longer function simply as filters or symbols. They become receivers, amplifiers, and reflectors of the inner work you are doing. For those who are new to these enhancements, it's advisable to start small and build slowly. Choose one or two methods that resonate with your lifestyle and observe how your space responds. Don't overclutter your plant's energetic field with too many elements at once. This can confuse the intention. Instead, treat your plant corner as a sacred laboratory. Observe it over weeks. How does the air feel? How do you feel when you pass that space? What ideas emerge there that didn't before? This kind of mindful observation is what transforms a decorative habit into an energetic practice. And once that shift happens, you'll begin to notice changes. Subtle at first, but unmistakable. A clearer mind, a more stable mood, a stronger sense of connection to the present moment. When these enhancements are paired with care rituals, such as wiping the leaves, watering with gratitude, or simply pausing beside your plant with a quiet breath, you create what in Buddhism is referred to as a mindful field. This is an energetic zone where your awareness is naturally heightened and your intentions are more easily imprinted into the space. Plants are sensitive to this field. They grow not just in soil and light, but in attention. And when that attention is directed through vibration, scent, crystal, or sound, their energy rises. They become your co-practitioners in manifesting a space of beauty, balance, and growth. Ultimately, energetic enhancements are not about complexity. They are about amplification. A plant on its own is already a miracle, but when paired with the right support, it becomes a living technology for shifting your home, your mindset, and your path. In Feng Shui, nothing is random. Everything is relational. And these enhancements remind us that growth is not an isolated act. It is a symphony. The more refined each instrument becomes, the more harmonic the song of your life will be. In Feng Shui, the most powerful transformations rarely arrive with fanfare. They don't knock on your door shouting change. They don't come from major renovations or expensive symbols. True shifts, lasting shifts, begin quietly, like the slow unfurling of a leaf in the morning light. They grow beside you, they breathe with you, and over time, they reflect you. Each of the 6 plants we've explored today is more than just a botanical suggestion. They are living allies, guardians of intention, protectors of energy, and mirrors of who you are becoming. A mini Bodhi tree that steadies your spirit and clears your mental scheming. A fragrant dracaena that blooms only when something in your life is ready to rise. A ginkgo that holds memory while preparing you for longevity. A corn plant that anchors your wealth and reminds you that prosperity must be protected. A lucky bamboo that bends but never breaks. And a peace lily that silences conflict and restores breath to your home. These aren't trends, they are teachers. The real question is, what in your space is truly protecting your dreams, and what's silently draining them? What sits in your corner collecting dust, no longer aligned with your path? And what might shift if you replaced it with something living, listening, and sacred? Plants don't demand from us, they simply show up. Day by day, they absorb, they shield, they harmonize. And when we care for them, not just with water, but with intention, they respond. Not with words, but with vibration. Not with guarantees, but with growth. And that growth, subtle as it may seem, becomes a field, a space, a sanctuary, a current that wraps around you, your family, your work, and your dreams. So if this video helped you see the living things around you in a new light, if it reminded you that what we nurture nurtures us, then I gently invite you to share it with someone you love. Leave a comment below with the plant you feel called to welcome, and subscribe to New Day Mindfulness. Your support brings us closer to our milestone of 2,000 followers. And more importantly, it allows us to continue offering thoughtful, spirit-led content that honors the ancient wisdom we all carry within. Because in the end, growing wealth isn't just about chasing more. It's about growing what protects you, what grounds you, what quietly, faithfully grows beside you.